Today, I want to discuss maybe my favorite show of all time, Full Metal Alchemist, and why I think it's great. For this video, I will be touching on minor spoilers to discuss the world and characters at length, but I'll do my best to not discuss major plot events, but I will be giving background context to the beginning of the show, as well as certain character relationships and character backstories. Fullmetal Alchemist was created in 2003 by Studio Bones. Based on the manga of the same name, the story is about two young brothers, Edward and Alphonse Elric, both of whom are searching for a way to restore their bodies back to normal. The story takes place in the country of Amestris, an alternate version of Europe in the early 1900s, but the use of alchemy fills this world. Previously, Adenau's mother passed away, and the boys tried to use alchemy to bring her back to life. However, this attempt failed and resulted in Al losing his body and Ed losing his left arm and right leg. The rest of the show is their journey to restore their bodies and navigate the harsh realities of the choices they have made. The beginning of the show follows the manga basically to a T. However, this didn't last because the anime quickly caught up to the manga, which left producers of the anime with a difficult choice. They had three feasible options. 1. Put production on halt and risk losing viewers and staff members. 2. Create low-quality filler that will drag out the rest of the show and make you less money. Or 3. Choose to take the story in a different direction than its source material. So, Studio Bones decided on option 3 and moved on past the manga, creating an anime-only ending. In the current context of 2019, not long after the controversial Game of Thrones TV show ending that left the books in the dust, it may be very easy to look at endings that don't follow its source material and say, that isn't a good idea. But Fullmetal Alchemist proves that a show can be great even without following its source material. There was eventually a more faithful adaptation called Fullmetal Alchemist Brotherhood, which is also an incredible show. But in the 16 years since its release, the original has gotten left by the wayside. So today, I want to talk about the merits of the original Fullmetal Alchemist and why you need to watch it. I first discovered the world of Fullmetal Alchemist in 2009. Late at night after I watched the newest episode of Naruto Shippuden, I was with my brother and we saw this commercial for a show about a sad boy with a robot arm and his robot brother. The show seemed cool, dark, and edgy, and instantly my brother and I had to watch it. We soon discovered that there were two different versions of the show, one airing and one that was 6 years old. So we decided to start with the old version, and little did I know, that show would change my life forever. From the first episode, I was hooked and instantly captivated by the world and the characters that filled it. I think one of the big original selling points was how different the show felt from all the other popular titles I had been watching. Naruto and Dragon Ball Z were some of my favorite shows, but they are huge power fantasies that always felt standard in terms of story structure and who would ultimately win and lose. These fantasy worlds had brutal encounters between characters, and they were completely different from anything that I had seen in the West. The idea of a great moral figure was a commonality, quickly becoming stale, and even at a very young age, I could recognize that. So when I watched Fullmetal Alchemist for the first time, I was shocked at how different the series felt. Fullmetal Alchemist has some elements of power fantasy, but it is far closer to a drama than a full-blown action series. Power levels don't skyrocket, and life isn't all about training, then fighting, then repeating that process over and over again. FMA felt like it was full of real people who lived in a world slightly different than my own. It felt like a dark reality, where heroes of the story are subject to immense trauma and failure. Decisions carried tangible weight, and events early in the story can still be felt at the series' conclusion. The story felt like it was smarter than anything I had ever watched, and because of that, it soon became my favorite show. Even now, years later, I'm still watching it, and the biggest reason is because of the characters. When talking about the characters, it is hard to overstate how real each character feels. Everyone has their own agenda and priorities, and they all feel tangible within the world in which FMA takes place. One specific example of great character writing in the show is the character Roy Mustang. Roy is such a good character because of how he explores the themes of sacrifice and determination. Roy has to push aside relationships, put his friends at risk, and make amoral decisions to achieve his goal of being the leader of the country. Unlike so many shonen anime, his goal isn't sought after only through violence. No matter how strong Roy is, he must take many different routes to achieve his goal. Roy gives up time and relationships, causing him to lose friends along the way. He does his duty to his country even though he knows it's wrong, because he needs to work his way up to make a difference. However, he isn't without his flaws. He is often arrogant and selfish, and he makes plenty of mistakes. It is so easy to identify with Roy because of his unwavering resolve, and we understand his anger and fear, as well as his cockiness. The show also does a wonderful job of creating unique and genuine character relationships. For example, Roy and Hawkeye have one of the most fascinating and compelling relationships in the show. They are two characters who are completely devoted to each other, but not in the typical romantic way we so often see. They both have a strong love for one another, and you could see how they might eventually develop romantic feelings. But because of the situation they are in, they can't form that type of a relationship if Roy is going to make it to the top. This relationship makes me sad because you know how much they care, and you see scene after scene with a constant subtext of romantic tension. But they can never act on the feelings that everyone knows are there. This relationship is tragic, but on the other hand, it is also incredibly beautiful because of the complete devotion they have to each other. They both know what they must do in order for Roy to achieve his goal. Their feelings that could have turned into something romantic have evolved into simply pure admiration for one another. These types of unique character relationships are given to every character in the show. It is impossible to talk about the characters in the show and not mention Edward and Alphonse Elric. Our two main characters in the show are a breath of fresh air as far as protagonists go. Ed and Al are just young kids who happen to excel at alchemy. They are never the strongest characters in the show, but are talented enough to be recognized as prodigies for their age. What truly sets Ed and Al apart from so many other protagonists is their goal to fix their own mistakes. They don't want to be the greatest fighter or save the world, but instead they just want to fix something that they messed up and get their bodies back to normal. Their goal is centered on themselves and their past, and not directly connected to any other characters in the show. In most shows, the protagonist wants something they've never had, or they want to protect something that they currently have. Very few action-based shows focus on getting something back that was lost, at least at the start of the show. Goku wants to save the planet from Frieza, Naruto wants to be Hokage and get recognition that he never had, Luffy wants to be king of the pirates, and Gon wants to find his dad that he's never met. Ed and Al want to get back what they already lost, and accept that their mom will never come back to life. Having our protagonists frame in this way puts Ed and Al in situations that they are actively finding, but they are never the cause of. These situational environments give the show an interesting and mysterious conspiracy vibe, and allows our protagonists to slowly uncover the manipulation and corruption present in their government. But what makes them so great is how they are shaped by every little event in the show. They feel real because how they change from episode to episode. They slowly begin to understand the world and their small but important place in it. And early in the show, when we get flashbacks to Ed first becoming a state alchemist, we see them question what they are doing, not able to really ground themselves in the decisions that they have made. And it's easy to understand them and understand these feelings because of how young they are. But by the end of the show, even though they're still just teenagers, they feel like full-blown adults who have dealt with the realities of the world and are easily able to cope with them. I'd be hard-pressed to find any character in the show that isn't well developed and serves as a way to echo the larger themes, especially with many of the characters who only make one appearance for an episode or two. The show also does a great job of having villains who are great on their own, but work to further their hero's character development. The main villains are the 7 homunculi and Dante. The 7 homunculi are created when someone fails a human transmutation, and typically have lingering memories from their past and look like they did when they were human. This gives us a unique connection to each homunculus, because even though they're an embodiment of one of the 7 deadly sins, they have a connection to every character in the show because of how they are created by a failed human transmutation. And a great example of the character writing for the individual homunculi is Greed. Greed is introduced as this cool anti-hero wild card in the story, and he instantly feels very different from the homunculi that have already been shown. He has an incredible character design that shows his cool and calm personality, as well as his physical strength. As his name suggests, Greed wants to have everything, and immortality is at the top of the list. Greed's introduction is a perfect encapsulation of the character's beliefs. We first see Greed being held captive in a dungeon deep beneath the ground, and then watch him escape, leaving behind the other homunculi, so he can pursue his own personal goals. Immediately we see the strength, rebellious nature, and selfishness of Greed. This strong starting point for Greed's character goes a long way to develop him as a tangible person, and I believe the same strong introduction is given to every other character in the cast. However, a strong introduction isn't enough in a long-form story. You also need strong character progression. Greed's progression throughout the show is subtle, but it goes a long way. We see Greed make decisions that seem to contradict what he fundamentally believes. When he shows compassion for his comrades and makes decisions to help them, even if it wouldn't benefit him directly. We constantly hear Greed say how greedy he is to try to justify his actions, but you can't help but feel that he's making things that are going against his personal belief. Greed is just a small character in the show, but we get to see his character arc progress to the point where he doesn't care about the things he wanted in the past. In the end, he wants to be set free from the pain of always wanting something more. So we get this tragic little character arc that echoes the themes of the rest of the show and the creation of a real, believable character that we feel for. But greed also works to help further our protagonists. And the conflict between Greed and Edward in the middle of the show immediately shapes Ed for the rest of the series. This kind of development and character progression is what makes the 7 homunculi go from embodiments of sin to real characters, and what carries this huge cast of characters to feel like you could actually meet them in real life. Typically, the best villains are the ones that are opposite of their hero. In Fullmetal Alchemist, all of these villains are directly created from the mistakes that have been made by our heroes, forcing them to not only deal with the death of someone they loved or killed, but focus on the mistake of trying to bring them back to life. So our characters have to directly deal with their mistakes and are constantly put in situations by the homunculi where they have to face the consequences of what they have done. Instead of the homunculi being separate from our main characters, some of them are created by them, which immediately gives a more profound connection, as well as giving Ed and Al even more of a reason to fight them. Ed and Al not only have the burden to fix what has been done to them, but the task to fix the mistake of creating a homunculus. However, great characters doesn't just make a great show. One aspect of Fullmetal that sets itself apart is its tone. The tone of the show is incredibly dark and can even be shocking at times. But the bleak nature of the show never gets to be too much because of the brilliant humor. There will be scenes where you're laughing out loud, but then later in the episode, you'll be brought to tears. The show takes on dark themes and brutal reality, but in that reality, the characters always find time to laugh and smile. Another aspect of the show that is incredible is the sheer amount of world building. Since the show is only 51 episodes long, you can't expect the world to be as vast and deeply explored as its long-running shonen counterparts, but it is still deeply developed. There will be stretches of episodes where Ed and Al have to go into a city they've never been to previously and solve a mystery or some sort of corruption in that city. These episodes are very episodic in nature, and having characters that come up in just these episodes. But it makes this feeling that the world is lived in. One of the most important themes of the show is exploring the corruption side of politics, and seeing how each little town across the country is being affected in their own way not only builds tension for the viewer, as we are trying to find out the secrets of this corruption, but it adds even more weight to the final conflict of the show. One of my favorite parts of the show that I still haven't talked about yet is the soundtrack. This may be my favorite soundtrack in any show I have ever seen. Its effects can be felt through every scene in the show. The score doesn't just show up for the big moments, but every single second. And the director knows when it's best not to use sound at all. At times, the background will fade and we will hear the surrounding gunshots as our characters live in the constant reality of death. This is a subtle way to bring us closer into the world. I can't mention the soundtrack without bringing up the song Braja. Ed and Al's theme is haunting and beautiful and will stick in your head for days, while also making every scene that it's played in infinitely better. Another important aspect of the show is the animation and the art design. The artwork isn't flashy, and at a glance, comparing it to the great animation of modern titles, it can be off-putting, and at times it can feel flat. But the excellent art direction and spike in quality more than makes up for that. The color palettes used in the show do a great job of echoing the themes of belief and religion, and are just amazing to look at. The fight scenes are really where the show's animation shines. The quality tends to spike during these brutal affairs in the show. So, the animation may not be able to stand up to the beautiful animation of today's anime, but the detail and great direction is more than enough to make up for that. Now that I have raved about the show for an ungodly amount of time, I think I should discuss some of the show's flaws. The biggest issue in my eyes is that the pacing can sometimes drag. And while the episodic episodes of Ed and Al traveling do a lot to build up the world, the individual storylines themselves vary greatly in how good they are. Some episodes are incredible, but at times you just want to move on to the larger plot. This can make the show feel longer than its 51 episodes. But truthfully, these moments are a very small portion of the show. And besides that, I have no other major flaws. Now, I want to talk about the ending for a moment. So if you don't want to be totally spoiled, skip to the time on the screen. The ending of this series is a brilliant and bittersweet conclusion to the show. This is one of my favorite endings in any show I have ever seen because of how there is payoff for everything that we have seen before, and it keeps the darker spirit of the show until the very end. There are two plot lines that are completed at the end of the show: Ed and Al's conflict with Dante and the remaining homunculi, and Roy's attempt to overthrow the government. Roy's plotline ends in a fight with Pride, or Fuhrer Bradley. The fight is short but brutal, and we see just how outclassed Roy is. But at this point in his arc, he has to give everything to atone for the mistakes he has made. The fight ends with Salim, Bradley's son, arriving at the fight with the bones from Bradley's human body. This is the turning point in the fight, where Roy is able to finish off the corrupt leader of the government, but at the cost of Bradley killing his son, Salim. This ending hammers home the idea of sacrifice and what sacrifice means in the wake of achieving great things. What I always think about after watching this is how the history of Amestris will remember these events. Kids will learn about how brave Roy Mustang was to overcome and overthrow a corrupt leader. But what won't be talked about is the loss of Salim and countless soldiers, the doubts and the terrible things Roy has done, and the way Hawkeye screamed, laying over Roy, hoping that he is still alive. The ending gives us a satisfying conclusion to what has been set up in the show with Roy, but with a grim reality that makes it heartbreaking at the same time. Ed and Al's fight with Dante also has themes of how sacrifice is necessary to achieve what they want, but it comes in a much different fashion. Ed is set across the gate to our world during World War I. He learns that his dad had reasons for the things he did and understands the mistakes he made to his kids. He learns that this whole time alchemy was used from the energy of souls in another world, that he was always creating from others' lives. He is able to return back and almost loses his life to envy. But Al sacrifices himself to save Ed, and in the Ed is able to bring Al back to normal, but in doing so is sent permanently to the other side of the gate, to live in a world where alchemy doesn't exist, and in a world where he and his brother are not together. Al is back to normal, but at the age of 10, and without the memories of the 4 years he and his brother were searching for their bodies. They end the show away from each other, holding their hands up in the sky, and even though both had to sacrifice so much and made so many mistakes, they will keep moving forward. In the end, you get a show that has incredible characters, engaging themes, and a satisfying ending. There are still so many things that I could talk about with this show, but I would need a whole course to get through it all. But after this video, I hope you will go back and rewatch this magnificent show, because 16 years later, there is still nothing that compares to it.